Hi, everyone. Welcome to this YouTube channel. My name is Levi Cosijn. Today, I'm speaking with Anthony Lewis. Hi, Anthony. How are you?
Hi, good to see you.
Good to have you back. Anthony and I are doing a mini-series on Horary Astrology. We've been looking at a William Lilly example, a relationship example, and today we're going to look at career. And so I asked Anthony to prepare an example. What are we looking at today?
Okay, well, today I actually have two examples.
Great.
But I did an internet search. I found a really nice one, contemporary example from a Portuguese astrologer, which shows a lot of the principles. And then I looked at a famous old example from Mashallah.
Cool.
So,
yeah.
Shall we start?
Please.
Let me share my screen. So the first example is a woman asked the astrologer whether she would get a job. She just completed an interview, so she got as far as getting an interview and wanted to know if the interview would result in a job offer. Okay. So will I get the job? It was asked in October of 2013 in Portugal. And the astrologer who did the original chart is Paulo Alexandre Silva. He's a Portuguese astrologer. And I contacted him and asked his permission to use his chart. He said it was fine. So he's the astrologer. The querent came to him, and this is the chart. I had the interview. Will they offer me the job? And in Horary, we often start with the ascendant. Here it's Sagittarius. So she, the querent, is ruled by Jupiter. Okay, and Jupiter's over here in Cancer in the 8th. Cancer is very nice. I'm using the tropical zodiac, by the way. And I'm using Regiomontanus houses as he did, so I did.
Yeah.
Whenever I look at someone else's horary chart, I always stick with their parameters they used to answer the question. Sure. Because that's what the question originally was. So he's clearly, I think, following Lilly. He's using Regiomontanus and the tropical zodiac. It's nice that Jupiter is in Cancer because it is exalted there. It's in the 8th house, which may or may not be some sort of a disadvantage because the 8th isn't a great house, but it does have to do with other people's money, so maybe it's good. She has Virgo on the midheaven. In career-related questions, we look at the midheaven. This comes up a lot in Horary. Some modern authors use the 6th house for the job. Lilly used the 10th, and I think the tradition is to use the 10th because a new job is considered a career advancement. Yes. And the 6th house is more like day-to-day drudgery, things, chores you have to do, tasks you have to do. But a real career advancement is a 10th house issue. So the job would be represented by Virgo and Mercury, right? Mercury rules Virgo. Virgo's on the 10th cusp. Here we're using a quadrant house, so Virgo is the 10th cusp ruler. Even if we were using whole signs, it would still be the 10th sign from the ascendant.
Yeah.
Jupiter's exalted, but in the 8th, Mercury, okay. Mercury's not the querent, it's the job. Yeah. I made a mistake here.
It's
Mercury
fine, it's in the 12th.
Represents the job. And if you look at the dignity of Mercury, it's in Scorpio in the 12th, right on the cusp of the 12th. And it's stationary.
Right.
So right away, we see some sort of a warning that Mercury is peregrine at this point in the zodiac, meaning it has no essential dignity. It's not in a sign that it rules. It's not in its exaltation. It's not a triplicity ruler. It doesn't rule a term or a decan at this spot. So it has no essential dignity. And the 12th house is usually a house of sort of loss, disappointment, grief, expenditure, losing rather than gaining. So right away, the job is not looking very promising, at least from its essential dignities.
Yeah.
And the fact that Mercury's stationary usually in the way Lilly interpreted planetary speeds, if it's fast, things are going rapidly, they're improving, they're sort of going fast toward what you want. If they're retrograde, they're moving away, they're moving backwards. And if they're stationary, they're kind of stuck. They're just not moving at all. So here we get a sense maybe this job is not moving, right? On the other hand, Mercury and Jupiter are making a very nice trine here.
Yeah.
That's really positive. So the question is, Mercury stationary, is it about to go backwards away from the trine or forwards toward the trine? If we're moving forwards toward perfecting the trine, this 18, this is 20. If we're moving 18, 19, 20, that would be very promising for getting the job. If, on the other hand, it's moving 18 backwards away from 20, 17, 16, 15, she'd be moving away. The job would be moving away from her, basically. Mercury's the job.
Yes.
Let's go on. Comments? Or?
Well, I see there's an exalted planet in the 8th house, and the 8th lord is in its exaltation sign. And moon is, of course, important.
Right, the moon is very important in Horary.
And so when Mercury would go forward, it would trine Jupiter, but backwards it would conjunct Saturn and the North Node.
Right. It's a day chart. In Hellenistic astrology, charts were divided into two big groupings, day and night charts. Day, the sun is above the horizon. Night, the sun is below the horizon. And in a day chart, the day planets are more prominent and effective. So the day planets are the big ones, Jupiter, Saturn, and the sun. And
Sure.
Mercury is considered a day planet if it rises before the sun, and a night planet if it rises after the sun. So here Mercury is a night planet because the sun comes up before Mercury does. It's a day chart so that Mars, being a night planet, the night planets are the moon, Venus, Mars, the more inner planets, and Mercury if it rises after the sun. So here we have Mars, the malefic of the night sect, very prominent, high, elevated in the chart, in a day chart. That's not such a good omen.
I mean, you mean going towards that 10th cusp?
That, well, also, I don't think Paolo talked about this, but some astrologers look at the most elevated planet in the chart, the highest one in the chart. Mm-hmm. This is probably a Persian idea, that the idea being, if you're in the same room as the king, no one's head can be higher than that of the king. So that elevation is very significant. Mars is the highest, literally the highest planet. It has the most altitude above the horizon here.
Yes, in Leo there, yeah.
And
well, it's in Virgo, but yeah.
Yeah.
I know what you mean, yeah.
And so, but also Mars is in a day chart, Mars is a malefic. Mars and Saturn are the malefics. But in a day chart, Mars is a little bit more malefic because it's in an uncomfortable territory.
That's right.
It's with the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And I focused on Mars because Mars is the rule hour lord here. She asked the question during a Mars hour. Mm-hmm. Did I say that? No, I didn't.
You haven't said it. Oh, yeah.
I'm saying it here. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Mars rules the 12th also. Oh, so yeah, please go on. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No.
No. Please go on. I'll just let you talk.
The hour lord of the question, that is the planet that rules the hour when the question is asked, is considered highly significant and is one of the determinants of whether the chart is so-called radical or not, meaning whether it will give a valid answer or not. And here we have the hour lord being quite malefic, which is a suggestion that maybe this ain't going to work out so good.
Could it indicate the competition? Mars rules 12th, which is, of course, a house of loss.
Several people were interviewed for this job, and she wants to, will she be the one who wins? Now, Mercury rules the L10, Lord of the 10th. We already talked about, we'll trine Mars. It looks like it will, but Mercury's stationary. And we want to know, is it going to be stationary direct or stationary retrograde?
Mm-hmm.
A lot will hinge on which way Mercury is going to move after the question is asked. So I put up the ephemeris. This question is asked October 21st. So here's October 21st when she asked the question. Mercury's stationary, and very shortly after the question, it turns retrograde.
Right.
So Mercury's backing away from that trine.
Mm-hmm.
Not a good sign that she'll get the job. And then if we follow Mercury down, what is the next aspect it makes? It's going to conjoin Saturn. You already pointed this out, right? On October 29th, we have Mercury coming together with Saturn. So let me go back to the chart so we see what's happening.
I wonder what the finish that thought. Yeah,
so we can see what the list looked like. Mm-hmm. Mercury was stationary when she asked the question. It very shortly turned retrograde. It backed up to here, and on the 29th, 8 days later, it conjoined Saturn.
Right.
So it looks like the next thing the job is going to do is going to conjoin a malefic instead of conjoin her ruler, which is Jupiter. That's a suggestion that she won't get the job.
Yeah. I wonder what the exalted Lagna Lord, ascendant Lord does. What it represents in her case. What could indicate capability, but also a weakness because of the 8th house.
Right. It's exalted, so she probably was a very attractive candidate. But the Mercury's not moving to trine it, so maybe there's somebody who was even a little better than she was.
Yeah, possibly.
So Mercury stationary, we said this, the next aspect is a conjunction with Saturn. Now, it would be nice if, even if Mercury went back a day or two and then forward and then conjoin Jupiter, trine Jupiter, that could indicate getting the job after some delay. But here it goes back, and the next thing it does, it conjoins Saturn.
Yes.
Okay. And Jupiter hardly moves during this period, right? It moves from 2001 to 2023 or so.
Yeah. Well, I think the fact that Mars is, has that function, and Mars is, peers and people you compete with, as also is the 3rd house, can also be connected to that.
It was a moon day during a Mars hour. Okay. So Mercury's turning retrograde, moving towards Saturn in about 8 days. And so it's not going to trine Jupiter. At some point it's going to turn direct and trine the Jupiter, but not anytime soon.
Yeah.
So we could say that Saturn interferes with this trine, because Mercury is going to connect with Saturn before it trines the Jupiter.
Yeah, it's going to be weeks also, about 3 weeks.
Yeah, a long time, yeah. And Lilly gave a name to this, Lilly on prohibition. This is a form of prohibition. We talked about that the last video. When 2 planets that signify the matter are applying to an aspect, but before they can come to the true aspect as perfected, another planet interposes his body or aspect so that the matter propounded is hindered and retarded.
We also find this in Persian astrology, like in the Tajika system.
Lilly took his rules from he had translations of those texts. So,
right.
So it's the Tajika and Lilly are drawing from the same original Persian texts.
Yeah.
Lilly had translations of, I guess the Arabs brought them to Spain, the Spanish translated into Latin. Lilly read Latin, so I think he probably read them in Latin.
Right.
So to go back, the idea is Mercury's the job, and the job, instead of coming to her, the trine, is moving to her disappointment. Saturn here, I think, is probably peregrine, has no dignity where it is. So Mercury is going to disappointment, loss, sadness, all the things
Yeah.
Saturn debilitating.
The node is also there,
right,
close.
would represent. The other thing that we talked about, the moon can co-rule the querent. It shows movement in the question, and the moon had squared the Mercury and is moving away from it. So even the moon, if it represented her, the querent, would be moving away from any aspect to Mercury.
Yeah, just opposed, right?
They just opposed, and now it's moving away.
Yes.
So this could mean that the moon was probably opposite during the interview. And then she asked the astrologer, and by then the moon is moving away from the opposition. So they probably decided during the interview not to offer her the job.
Yeah.
And that's probably what this moon moving away from the opposition of Mercury symbolizes in this chart.
I think if you look at the, the querent is in the 8th, also in the 6th, the dignities are both just fine. So it shows capability, but then the job is in the 12th, going back soon in Scorpio, conjunct Saturn and the node. So it doesn't really look, and then it's also, Venus is also quite prominent on the ascendant. And what does Venus rule here? It rules the 6th. Right, so it's all these difficult connotations connected to the querent.
Yeah.
Yet she's very capable, it seems.
And you pointed out that Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, ruled by the moon. But the dispositor of Jupiter being the moon, and the dispositor of this 8th house being the moon is separating from this sextile to Jupiter. Separations refer to the past. So if it were approaching, that would be more positive. That might indicate maybe she will get the job. But the idea here, the moon is moving away from, widening that angle. So it's less likely she'd get the job. There was a chart I did years ago. Somebody contacted me. He'd applied for I think it was a scholarship. He was a college student and wanted to study abroad. It was very competitive. And the chart had it mixed. Some of the factors into, yes, he'd get the scholarship and travel abroad. And then there were some like this, things were moving away. I thought the predominance was that he would get it. And what happened was, and I told him that, and he wrote back to me and said, no, I didn't get it, somebody else did. And so my response was, the chart's very strong that you would get it. So it's possible this other person who got offered the position won't be able to travel abroad, and they'll give it to you next. And that's what happened.
Wow.
So it's interesting how these play out.
Yes. If it's really positive, it's, you have to stick to your conclusion.
But if it's mixed, you have to say, the predominance of factors say, yes, you'll get it, but there is some chance you won't. Or if it looks balanced, you could say, probably you won't get it, but there is a chance maybe the person they offer it to initially will not take it, and then you'll get it.
Yeah, I think it's a good exercise. I mean, I find that when I do readings for people, and when I get, contradictory indications, it's quite challenging and it takes a lot of time. But in the end, it kind of presents itself like there's a display of opposition all the time.
Yeah, well, the chart reflects life, and life is not straightforward and uncomplicated.
It's not that linear, but sometimes it takes a lot of time to kind of weigh all these opposites. And then at a certain point, there is something that prevails most of the time.
Yeah.
And then most of the time, it also plays out correctly.
Right. But here, the predominant factors would be the Mercury and the Jupiter. They rule the querent and the job.
Yeah.
And they're clearly moving away from each other. And Mercury is going to hit Saturn long before it would ever get to Jupiter. That's a strong argument that she wouldn't.
I also see a lot of fortune is opposing Pluto, which is always fun.
Right. You're very closely opposing,
Yeah.
Interesting. And Pluto's right on that second ninth axis. And the second is her income, her financial picture.
I think also the sun is a karaka of power and of status, which is in its debilitation sign. And I also would look at Saturn in that light, and it's in Scorpio. And I think Saturn in Scorpio is even worse than in Aries. I mean, in practice, I see it. It's quite challenging in Saturn in a water sign in bad dignity.
Yeah.
And then the node is also there. We don't really find a lot of supporting factors in this example.
So the only supporting factors immediately looking to say, oh, Mercury is trine Jupiter. That looks really good. A nice trine.
Yeah, and Jupiter is
exalted. Look further at how the chart's going to unfold. The trine isn't, it loses its power here. So Lilly called this type of prohibition reformation, that's being refrained from. And he gives the example, suppose Mars is at 7 of Aries and it's moving towards Saturn at 12 of Aries. But before Mars can get to the 12 of Aries, it turns retrograde at about 10 or 11. And so Mars never reaches the Saturn. So this Mars is refrained from completing the aspect. That's what, see what he says. Well, let me read, this is Lilly directly.
Yeah.
There's another manner of prohibition, by some more properly called reformation, as thus, let Saturn be in the 12th degree of Aries and Mars in the 7th. Mars hastens to conjoin Saturn, but before Mars comes to the 10th or 11th degree of Aries, suppose he becomes retrograde, and by that means refrains to come to a conjunction of Saturn, who still moves forward, Saturn still moving forward in the sign. Then nothing signified by the former conjunction will be affected. So in other words, if one planet is moving toward the other, but before it gets there, it turns retrograde and backs away,
right,
the matter won't come to pass. And that's what this chart is about.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And the moon is always important to look at in horary. So here I put in the ephemeris. The question's asked on the 21st. Actually, the question was asked at 11:25 in the morning on the 21st. And Mercury turned retrograde at 11:28, so 11:29 essentially. So she asked the question 4 minutes before Mercury turned retrograde. That's quite amazing. She was onto something. She wants the job, and just before Mercury, the symbol of the job, turns backwards and moves away from her, she asked the question. I thought that was quite striking.
Right. And also Mercury is astrology. And I mean, I think any stationary planet becomes very powerful and kind of prominent.
And then the moon is moving away from the sextile to Jupiter, probably symbolizing that she was accepted for the job interview because she got the interview. But the moon's next aspect, we always look at the sequence of aspects of the moon. The moon's next aspect will be a square to Mars, which is that out of sect malefic and the hour ruler.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah.
And this occurs after the moon changes sign from Taurus, where it's in exaltation, into the Gemini, where it has no dignity. So here's the aspects of the moon. She asked the question right away, Mercury turns retrograde. Job's moving away from her. Then the moon moves from Taurus into Gemini. So the moon goes from exaltation to having no dignity. And in Gemini, the moon squares the Mars, which is the malefic out of sect. So the moon is indicating things are going from, things were pretty good before the question, she got the job interview, to things are going to be disappointing and go against her afterwards.
Yeah, it's if the moon is the querent, then she's kind of squaring the competition.
Right. And the moon is sort of the general flow of events related to the question.
Also, yeah.
So if we follow the path of the moon here, we see really good. She gets the interview. She thought it went well. 4 minutes before this, she asked the question that Mercury, the job, turns backwards. To me, that is just so amazing, the timing. She must be really in tune with the universe here.
Yeah. She didn't need to have that job, apparently.
Okay. So this case number one has no favorable indicators. Here's his Portuguese, which I translated into English. I concluded that the querent would not be accepted for employment, and that is how the matter turned out.
Mm-hmm.
That's my I think it's a fairly decent translation.
Perfect. Yeah. Good example.
So the second case, Mashallah was a 8th century Persian astrologer.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote a number of texts, and this text is taken from his one on receptions in astrology. And for references, I use the translations by Ben Dykes and James Holden.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy wanted to be, I guess, assigned to be governor of a certain region of the kingdom. So he asked Mashallah, will I receive this command? Will I be put in charge of this kingdom or fiefdom, whatever it is? And he asked it in the year 791 in April. The exact location is not clear. I reconstructed the chart from the notes that Ben Dykes and James Holden, their translations. And the best I could do, well, here's from the Dykes translation. He gives the positions of the various planets in the chart. And so playing with these positions and regions around Basra and Baghdad and so on, and using various ayanamsas to come up, because the Persians were using sidereal
Zodiac, yeah.
Zodiac. At least their tables were more sidereal than tropical.
Mm-hmm.
And then the modern calculations are going to be at some difference from the tables they use because we have better telescopes.
Sure.
So the best I could do was this one. I set this for Kuwait to get the angles more or less aligned with what Mashallah said. Mm-hmm. April 21st. And I used an ayanamsha I don't normally use, Sri Yuktasvar. Do you know this one?
Yeah, he was the Yogananda's guru.
Okay. And his ayanamsas seem to work pretty close to what Mashallah was using. Some of the planets are off by a degree or two, but they're all in the right sign. Mm-hmm. Well, let's go back. Here's the moon is at about 3 degrees. He says the moon is in the 4th degree. So that's right on. The 4th degree is 3 degrees. Mm-hmm. Mars is at 22 Gemini. Let's see. Where's Mars here? 25 Gemini. So it's a few degrees off. Everything is in the correct sign, the correct house. I used Alcibiades houses. But some of the planets are a degree or 2 or 3 off. But this is the best I could come with a modern computer. Okay. So it's close enough. So now Mashallah Zanel, he says, as we all do, the querent is the first house ruler, the moon, because Cancer's rising. So the guy who wants to know, will I get the kingdom, is this moon in Libra in the 4th. Mm-hmm. And then Mashallah's idea is he's kind of negotiating for a position. So the position, the kingdom, is the job up here, the 10th house ruled by Mars, Aries up there. But the person he's negotiating with is the 7th house ruler, Saturn, because Capricorn is there. Mm-hmm. So he's going to look at how does the moon relate to Saturn? Because that's the business deal this guy's trying to make. Okay, and Saturn is the guy he's negotiating with. Yes. And Saturn happens to be up here in the 10th, so this is the kingdom he wants to be given governance of. Yeah. The sun is also up here, exalted. Mm-hmm. And it's a Jupiter day during a Mercury hour. And they're both here in the 11th acquisition. So that makes some sense. He wants to acquire a kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, Sun is at the last degree.
Right.
Saturn
now, let me just
debilitated.
go back here. Where's the Sun here? Did I list the Sun?
Yeah.
Oh, here, the 29th degree. So Mashallah has it in 28. The
Right.
computer puts it in 29.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Mashallah would have it a degree earlier. Okay.
Sure.
But I couldn't, I guess, if I fooled around with the Ayanamsha, the moon would move back to Virgo, and I wanted to keep the moon in early Libra. So this is the best I could come up with.
Mm-hmm.
And here it is, a little less cluttered. Okay.
Right. So moon is approaching the 7th lord in the 10th house, but the 7th lord is debilitated.
Right. So here's Mashallah's analysis. As Cancer rises, so the moon is the querent. Okay. Capricorn, the 7th, makes Saturn the person he must bargain with to be granted command. Saturn's up here. Saturn receives the moon. Remember, this is in his book on receptions. So he's talking about what receives what. The moon in Libra is the sign of exaltation of Saturn. Saturn's exalted in Libra. So he says Saturn receives the moon in Saturn's exaltation.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Because the moon is in a place that Saturn really likes and feels exalted in. Yeah. Saturn will be kindly disposed toward the moon and more willing to give him this command. That's his reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good thing for the querent, that this guy is going to like what he sees because the moon is approaching him from an exaltation sign of Saturn. And the moon will perfect an opposition to Saturn in about 11 degrees. Now in Mashallah, let's go back to his numbers. His moon is in the 4th degree and his Saturn is in the 11th degree. So 4 to 11 is really 7 degrees, right?
Yeah.
But with the modern chart, I'm getting 11 degrees. So 7, 8, and 4 degrees different. But Mashallah says because there's only 7 degrees separating the moon from opposing Saturn, maybe in 7 days he'll get a response. He'll know if he's got the kingdom.
Mm-hmm. So
he's equating the number of degrees it takes to perfect the aspect with when it's going to happen. Right. So to recap his argument, Saturn is the guy who has the kingdom to give. Saturn is very kindly disposed toward the moon because the moon is asking from Saturn's sign of exaltation. They're going to come to an opposition, which is a major aspect. It's like first 7th house aspect, really. Mm-hmm. And that symbolizes a business deal. So the deal will get finalized when the moon perfects that opposition to Saturn. And that's 7 days hence in Mashallah's calculations, or by the modern computer, 11 days hence. Mm-hmm. But Mashallah says, he may get this kingdom, but he ain't going to like it. Mm-hmm. Because, first of all, the aspect that perfects the deal is an opposition, so it's a stressful aspect.
Yeah.
Oppositions mean that the moon guy is going to have to work really hard. There's going to be a lot of stress and strife, and he's going to have to be very persistent, and it's not going to come easily. Oppositions you have to work hard at to make them work. In addition, Saturn is in Aries, which is the sign of its fall. So Saturn is debilitated. So this guy is going after, now he's looking at Saturn in the 10th as describing the job that he wants, the career. Well, it's not a very good sign that Saturn is debilitated in Aries, its fall in the 10th, which is the kingdom he wants. So this kingdom really sucks. He's not going to like it.
Yes, and also the Lord of Aries, Mars, is the cruel planet for a day chart, and it's approaching its debilitation on the ascendant.
Right.
With the node.
Right, so the dispositor of Saturn and the ruler of the 10th.
And the sun is also, of course, is with Saturn, which is always difficult.
Yeah. And the sun is in a very late degree of the sign. So,
right. And also moon just came from a square with Mars.
Yeah.
So I don't know what was about, but it's what's happening also.
So it says Saturn in Aries is in the sign of its fall, which is a place that Saturn despises and regards as worthless. These are words I took from Holden's translation.
Yeah.
So according to Mashallah, a planet really despises the sign where it has its fall. It thinks it's disgusting, worthless. It doesn't want to be there. It hates it. And so he says, since the moon is moving to connecting with Saturn, which despises its location, this man's going to get a job or career move in a place that he will despise. He's going to hate this job. What did I say here? The fallen Saturn, which the moon is applying toward, occupies the 10th house, which is the kingdom sought, and describes that kingdom as despicable, worthless, restrictive, etc., all the negative connotations of Saturn. So the moon will hate the 10th house kingdom, just as Saturn hates the sign of its fall. So he's going to get the job, but he's going to hate it, is the interpretation.
Yes.
Move on. And I think we said this already. Mashallah says the number of degrees between the moon and Saturn perfecting the opposition could be converted to days. In the modern chart, it's 11 days. In Mashallah's tables, it was 7 days. So if not then, so if he doesn't get assigned this kingdom in 7 or 11 days, then when might he receive it? So here he's talking about timing. Well, he could receive it when the moon transits to the position of Saturn, which Saturn occupied when the opposition perfected. In other words, he's saying, if the moon opposing Saturn doesn't give him the job, then when the moon moves up here and conjoins this spot, 13 of Aries, maybe he'd get the job then. So he's moving from a symbolic measure in the chart to, let's look at the transit of the moon, and they're roughly opposite, so that's maybe 15 days, right? It takes the moon, about 28 days to get around the chart. Half of it would be 14, but the moon is a little before Saturn, so 14, 15 days from now.
Right.
So if he doesn't hear in 7 days by Mashallah's tables, maybe in 14, 15 days, he'll get the job.
I think it's confirmed by Mars, the 10th cusp lord, being also then on the ascendant. I mean, moving towards the ascendant
right.
very, very closely.
Yeah.
And it's debilitated. So that's another indication confirming the debilitation of Saturn in the 10th house. There's like this, tension going on between these two cruel planets.
Yeah.
Which signify both, the career or the kingdom rather.
Right. And if you think back to Lilly followed the same approach. Lilly would look at when will the moon oppose Saturn? That's here 11 degrees, so maybe 11 days. So he's doing a symbolic measure from the chart.
Yeah.
And then Lilly would also take out his ephemeris and say, when will the moon connect with Saturn? Well, that's 14 days by transit. And so Lilly followed the same method of measuring time, which is interesting. He says, if not in 14 days, this confused me. He said he could receive the kingdom when Venus, which disposes the moon, reaches the degree of the ascendant. So it sounds like he's talking about when Venus reaches the degree of the ascendant 13 of Cancer. That's at least from Holden's translation. But I don't know if by the degree of the ascendant he means 13 in any sign, because then Venus could maybe get the job when Venus reaches 13 of Aries, which is where Saturn is. I'm not clear what Mashallah meant here. it seemed to me this is going to take a long time for Venus to get all the way over to the ascendant. So
Yeah,
maybe
so the
when it gets to
13 degree
13 of
point, yeah.
Aries, which happens where Saturn is, that would make sense because Venus disposes the moon. And maybe in about a month, Venus gets here. We might also note the moon will conjoin the position of the sun on May 6th, 15 days after the question. Right, so the moon in 14 days will conjoin Saturn, and then a day later conjoins the sun. And the sun is the exalted ruler of the 10th here.
Right.
So it looks like 14, 15 days is most likely, like the transits of the moon. And then maybe, Venus moves roughly a degree a day. So 17 to...
Yeah, to another...
The change of sign will be 13, and then another 13 to be 26 days is what? So roughly a month, maybe within a month. So first, within a week, that's the 7 days. If not within a week, maybe within 2 weeks, because that's when the moon will be up here conjoining everything in the 10th. And if not 2 weeks, maybe a month later when Venus gets to Saturn, because Venus disposes the moon.
Venus is also exalted. I would say, I mean, it's going to be about 2 weeks before Venus gets to TMC, and when the moon is also transiting Saturn. So it's more likely
even
on,
if
on
it's
that
Venus,
account.
when Venus gets to Aries, Venus isn't so happy in Aries, right? So here's the outcome. He did receive the command. And this was very confusing to me again. This is the Holden translation. Its delay was until it returned to its own domicile in 15 days. I'm not sure what its delay refers to. The receipt of the command, when it returned to its own domicile, I wondered if he meant when the moon gets to the domicile of the command.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a 2 week mark. It seems like the strongest point also, just purely based on the chart.
But Ben Dykes translates it a little differently. I don't have the original Latin, so I was looking for the Latin of this so I could try to translate it myself. Because Dykes translated is that when, after he got the command, he stayed there for 15 days and went back home, that his own domicile was his own house. So this guy wanted the command so bad, he got it. He lasted 15 days and said, I'm out of here, and went home again. That's how Dykes translated it, which is possible. I'd like to see the Latin. Ideally, it'd be good to read this in the Arabic, the original, but I don't read Arabic. So I don't know what Mashallah is saying here, and there's two different translations of the interpretation, but something took 15 days.
Yeah, we can ask Kazani.
But what's clear is Mashallah says he did hate the new position. It turned out to be a very small, almost useless advance in his career, as was symbolized by Saturn despising being in its fallen Aries.
Yeah.
And Mashallah adds that the main significators, the moon and Saturn, were occupying angular houses. The moon is at the 4th house, Saturn's in the 10th house, showed the stability of his authority and the strength of his office, even though he despised the new position. This makes me think he kept the position because he had stable authority and strength of office where he was. He just hated being there.
Yeah.
So this makes me think the 15 days refers to the moon moving up here to the 10th house and conjoining these two planets.
So Venus is the 11th lord, and it's exalted and disposing the moon. So in that, I mean, it confirms that he actually gets it. But then it evolves. I mean, 2 weeks later is going to be moon on Saturn, and then Venus also.
And Venus in
very
Aries,
close.
where Venus is not so happy, right?
Yeah. Well, apparently it's played out like that. And then Mars on the ascendant, well, closer to the ascendant in 2 weeks.
Right. Mars moving into Cancer and being in its fall. Yeah. And I don't think I did the ephemeris. No, I didn't. This is the last slide. I didn't look at the ephemeris for Mars to see where Mars was moving.
Oh, it's fine. Yeah, I think it's quite clear.
But
Is there
Mars probably
anything
did move
else?
into Cancer within the 2 weeks to a month.
Right, right, right.
That would also signify his being miserable on this job. Yeah.
Yeah, but well, the question was answered, whether he would get it or not, and so
He got it and he hated it.
he didn't like it.
And
Yeah,
then, according to Ben Dykes, he hated it so much he quit after 2 weeks.
right.
And according to Holden, he just stayed there and was miserable.
Yeah. I think it's unlikely to if such a position of authority, and after 2 weeks, I mean, you have to have the will for it. So I think it's unlikely that a person would, from that caliber or that mindset, would quit the job after 2 weeks.
Yeah, I
Right?
think so too. Just politically speaking, you have this very powerful figure you're negotiating with for this job. He finally gives you the job, and you say, "Shove it! I hate this job." Uh, that's not going to further his career down the line. I mean, a smart person would stick it out, do his best job he could, and apply for an even better job. Use it as a stepping stone. So, but in any case, this is a classic example. Lilly was probably familiar with this example because he read these texts in Latin translation and derived a lot of his technique from the same ideas.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Anthony, for presenting this career example. Next, we're going to look at another relationship. I think it's good that we can practice and people can follow along. People like it. That's the way to go about it. Look at many different situations, many different horoscopes.
There is an interesting one, and Lilly has an example of a woman who was seeking to establish a relationship. But it's an interesting one because this guy had been pursuing her forever and she kept rebuffing him. And then he finally gave up and she said, "Oh, what did I do? Well, when will I ever get a husband? Maybe I should have said yes." And then she goes to Lilly and he uses the chart to give her advice about how to get him back in her life.
Right. So, yeah, I think that's a good example. Let's go for that one.
Yeah. And that one's interesting because the positions he uses, the ephemeris he uses, differ from the modern values, so that the planets are actually separating rather than applying in a key aspect.
Right. Cool. Okay, so let's do that. For now, thank you very much for your time and effort.
Sure.
And talk to you
soon.
Okay, bye, guys.
Okay.